Hello everyone. So we've practiced finding the 5-number summary, the quartiles, drawing the box plot. So now we want to understand how this is all used in analysis. So as I said, when we have a skewed distribution, we use the median as our measure of center. And from there, that's the reason why we then use the quartiles. We will use them to measure our variability. Okay. So when a distribution is skewed, we measure the center with the median, which is the second quartile. We measure the variability relative to the median with what's called the interquartile range. We label it IQR for short. I'll define it in a second. Furthermore, we will define the typical interval. Remember, we've talked about the typical interval before as kind of an interval that represents typical measurements. Well, now we have a more specific kind of objective way to think about it. We will talk about the typical interval as being the middle 50% of the data. Okay, so what does that all mean? First of all, the middle 50% corresponds to the 50% of individuals closest to the median, right? So the median is the middle of the distribution. So the 50% in the middle of the distribution is the 50% that are closest to the median. Let me just pull up a box plot from before. Right, so here is, for example, a box plot from before. Okay, so let's think about what these percentages, what these parts of the box plot represent. Remember, this is 25% of the data, this is 25% of the data, this is 25%, and this is 25%. So where would the middle 50% be? Where do you think? Think about it for a second. Okay, now that you're back, well, here's 50% of the data from here to here. And in particular, it's the 50% of the data that's in the middle. Right? This is 50% of the data as well, but it's the bottom 50% of the data. This is also 50% of the data, but this is the top 50%. This is the middle 50% from here to here. In other words, from Q1 to Q3 is the middle 50%. This is what we will refer to from now on when we use the 5-number summary as our typical interval. Right? So for example, in this particular example, the typical interval is from 80 to 160. Those are the typical values, which is probably what we would say if we were just looking at this graph and had done no calculations. Okay, so let me go back here. So the middle 50% corresponds to the 50% of individuals closest to the median. That is, the middle 50% is the interval from Q1 to Q3. Okay, this is going to be our typical interval from now on, at least when we are using the median and the quartiles. Okay. The variability relative to the median is calculated with the interquartile range. What is that? The interquartile range is the width of the middle 50%. So how big that middle 50% is. How do we calculate it? We subtract. The IQR, the interquartile range, will be the Q3 value minus the Q1 value. Okay. This will give you the size of that interval. So in this previous example here, right, my middle 50% here is from 80 to 160. That's my typical interval. And so the IQR represents the distance between 160 and 80, right, their difference. So the IQR is, in this case, 160 minus 80, which is 80. Maybe it didn't pick a good place to write it. Maybe I'll write it up here. So IQR 160 minus 80, which is 80. Okay, so let's use this in an analysis. So here I'm going to give you an actual data set. So I'm going to use graph paper for this. So analyze the following distribution of ages of Best Actress winners from 1970 to 2001. Okay, so if you're interested in the actual data, here's the actual data. If you want to pause it and write those values down if you want, or you can pause it and write these values down. So these are the values of all of the ages of the Best Actress winners from 1970 to 2001. Okay. All right, and here is the dot plot. So here's the dot plot of the ages right? Age and years. So we have a skewed distribution, right? Most of the winners are in this interval over here, are over here in their 30s, basically, with very few possible outliers out here, right? A 61-year-old winner, 74-year-old winner, and an 80-year-old winner. Okay, so the median is a good measure of center to use because the distribution is skewed. So let's start by finding the 5-number summary. Okay, so first of all, there are 32 individuals here. So 25% of 32 is 8. So that's a whole number. So the first quartile is between the 8th individual from the left and the 9th. 50% of 32 is 16. So Q2 is between X16 and X17. And 75% of 32 is 24. Q3 is between X24 and X25. Okay, so I just got to count from the left to see where these values actually are. So let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so here's X8 here. X8 is 31 years old. X9 is the next value over here. X9, which is 33 years old. So between 31 and 33, that's 32, right? So Q1, didn't leave myself enough space, sorry. Right up here. Q1 is 32 years old. Okay, Q2 between X16 and 17, so let's keep counting. This is 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. So this is X16 here, X17 here. Both of them are at this value, which I think is 36. Let me count. 31, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, 35. So X16 is 35 years old, and so is X17. So the median is between those two, which is also 35. Q2 is 35 years. Okay, and then let's keep counting. 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. This is X24 here. And then X25 is here. So X24 is 41 years old. And X25 is 42 years old. So Q3 is 41 and a half years old, 41 and a half years. All right. Okay, so my 5-number summary then, let's see, the youngest best actress winner was 21. And then 32 is the first quartile, 35, 41 and a half, and then the maximum is 80. Okay, so here's my 5-number summary here. Let's draw a box plot. Okay, so the first quartile is at 32, so that's here. And then 35 is the median, 41 and a half is third quartile, about there, so there's my box. And then whisker out to the left and all the way out here to the right. Okay. All right, very good. So now let's do our analysis. Okay. Why don't you take a moment and write down what your analysis would be before you look at what I have. Okay. So here's my analysis. First of all, the distribution is skewed right. That is, most Best Actress winners are younger, with, I would say, 3 possible outliers: 61, 74, and 80 years old. Okay. So since it's skewed right, the median is the best way to analyze the distribution. So in other words, since the distribution is skewed right, we need to find the 5-number summary. So the 5-number summary we just found was 21, 32, I forgot already, 35, 41 and a half, and 80 years old. Okay, the center of the distribution is the median. That's Q2, which is 35 years old. The median age, I should say best actress age is Q2, which is 35 years old. With a typical interval of ages given by the middle 50%. That's the new thing we just learned. Okay, so that's this interval here. This is the middle 50%. From the first quartile, which is 32, to the third quartile, which is 41 and a half. So 32 to 31 and a half, 41 and a half is the middle 50%, or the typical interval of ages. Okay, so kind of like we were thinking just from the graph, I said it looks like typically women win it in their 30s, which is approximately what this tells us. And then the overall range, the overall variability in ages given by the range is going to be 80 minus 21, or 59 years. Okay. So overall, there's a big variability, but what about in the middle of the distribution, right? The middle of the distribution doesn't take into account what are possible outliers, right? This 80 is definitely an outlier. This 74 is almost certainly an outlier. The 61 is probably an outlier as well. So the range takes into account the entire data set, including outliers, okay? And we know it's possible we have outliers since the distribution is skewed. And we're using median to begin with. So we want to kind of take into account the distribution, the variability of the distribution that doesn't take the outliers into effect. So that's where the IQR comes in. The variability in the middle 50% that is relative to the median. Sorry, I'm covering up the graph now. Hopefully that's not too big of a problem for you. Relative to the median is given by the IQR. That is how big this interval is. So we simply take the difference, 41 and a half minus 32, which is 9 and a half years old. 9 and a half years, I should say, not years old. Okay, so there's a lot of overall variability, but the typical woman, the typical best actress winner is contained to a 9.5 year interval, which is not that big, right? It's less than a decade. Okay, so there's about a decade where most of the women are winning Best Actress awards. Okay, so this is how we analyze the distribution using this new information. Again, key points: the median is the typical value. The middle 50%, Q1 to Q3, is the typical interval, and the width of the typical interval, the IQR, which is Q3 minus Q1, measures variability in the middle of the distribution that is relative to the median. Okay, thank you and have a good day.